I'm Commander Rob Field, and I'm the commanding officer and the flight leader of the United States Navy Flight Demonstration Squadron, the Blue Angels.
They call you boss. What exactly does that mean?
Well, I think that's a traditional name that started back when the team began back in 1946, and it just means that I'm in charge of the formation, the Delta formation and the Diamond formation as we go through our maneuvers.
How long have you been boss for the Blue Angels?
This is my second year, beginning of my second year right now.
How long have you been a naval aviator?
I've been a naval aviator for 20 years, so had a great time. It's a wonderful occupation, and this is a great way to finish up after a commanding officer tour, which is what I did prior to this.
Tell me something about the F-18. How does it differ from the other F-18s in the fleet?
Actually, our F-18s are actually older, and we've taken some of the equipment out of them, but they're the same basic airframe and power plants that you'll see in the aircraft that are flying missions off aircraft carriers right now.
I read that the sticks on your planes have a 35-pound spring on them. What does that do for you that regular F-18s don't have?
Well, what that allows us to do is in windy conditions like we have right today, it allows us to fly very close and not get a lot of movement out of the airplanes. And the best way to describe it, flying in bumpy conditions is kind of like driving your car down a dirt road with just one hand on the wheel, and every time you hit a bump, if you're just driving with one hand, it's going to move the wheel a little bit. Well, we can't afford that to fly our aircraft like that when we're that close, so the 35 pounds tightens up our entire body and allows us to keep the stick almost steady as we're going through all the bumps together, hopefully, which is what our desire is anyway.
Speaking of the ride and the G-forces that you deal with, what are the most Gs that you feel during any show?
Well, for the Diamond pilots, it's typically on some of our breakout maneuvers, and we'll get up to 7.5 Gs. The solo pilots will sustain 7.5 to 8 Gs in some of their turns.
As a child, did you ever see the Blue Angels?
I sure did, you bet.
How long do you remember wanting to be a Blue Angel?
Well, I think it was always a goal that I wasn't quite sure was attainable until I got into the Navy. And once I did get into the Navy, it was something that I desired to do, probably from my first opportunity stepping into a jet. I knew I probably had a chance to do it at some point, so I've been lucky enough to get selected to be the commanding officer, which I think is the best job.
Personally, how does it differ being part of the Blue Angel Squadron compared to just being in any other squadron of F-18s?
Well, there are a lot of similarities, but there are the differences, and the differences are primarily oriented towards what our mission is. And our mission is to do air shows and to expose young men and women to the Navy and Marine Corps and go around the country exposing people to their military. So that's quite different than someone that has a combat mission orientation.
Tell me something about the Make-A-Wish Foundation.
Well, I'll tell you, if there's one thing that makes me extremely proud to be able to do is to work with those young boys and girls. It breaks your heart to see some of these kids come out to the show and know that they may not be around in the next week or so, but it really, the best way to describe it is it's probably one of the best parts of this job. You really feel like you're doing something important for somebody.
Of all the maneuvers that people will see at the show, what is either the most difficult or demanding or takes the most practice, say for the Diamond formation?
Well, for the Diamond, it's actually some of the maneuvers that look the easiest, but they're the most difficult, and that would be the echelon work. The echelon parade, the left echelon roll. We're the only team that I'm aware of that actually rolls a formation into all three of the wingmen while they're in echelon, and the reason that's so difficult is because number 4 can't see me. He only sees number 3. Number 3 sees number 2, and so on. So any deviations that you see from the guy in front of you might be exponentially bigger as they come down the line. So it makes it extremely difficult. But when we do it, and we do it well, it looks very easy, but it's not. It's very hard.
Can you explain why is it that the Blue Angels do not wear the inflatable flight suits to combat the G-forces?
Well, that goes back to the description about the spring and trying to keep our hands steady when we're flying in tight formation. The G-suit bladders that you wear around your thigh actually expand and contract, and we place our forearm on our thigh to provide a nice platform for our hand. And if the G-suit was expanding and contracting, then it would actually move the stick. So that's why we don't wear one. Now the Thunderbirds wear G-suits, but the F-16 is set up differently. They have the side stick controller, and their hand actually rests on a piece of equipment that's designed for their arm to rest on. We don't have that, so a little different setup.
Now, since the Blue Angel's inception, the F-18 is the 8th aircraft I believe that you have flown. With all the technology that is always being developed and coming out, where do you see the Blue Angels going after the F-18 in terms of aircraft?
Well, what we have on our aircraft roadmap, if you will, is looks like we're going to transition to the F-18 ENF, which is the newest version of the aircraft, sometime in the 2006 to 2008 region. So we've already started looking into that, and we've made arrangements for the various things to happen, to have the aircraft modified, to have our training plans modified, and so forth. And it's going to be a fairly lengthy evolution to make that occur, but we're looking forward to that, and that ought to be a very exciting show when it does happen.
Now, when your time with the Blue Angels is up, will you go back into active service or back into an active squadron? And if so, would you wear any type of insignia or anything to identify that you were a Blue Angel?
I am. I've already been selected, lucky for me, to be a Air Wing commander. So after this tour, I know where I'm going. Right now, it looks like CAG 7 on the East Coast, out of Oceana, Virginia. So I'm very excited about that, to have that opportunity. And we don't wear any Blue Angel insignia on our flight gear after this. However, we'll always be a Blue Angel for the rest of our lives, and that's something very special.
And last question. Tell me something about the camaraderie. How does it differ within the Blue Angels between your crew and between each of the pilots compared to the standard squadron?
The only way it would differ, I would say, is it's more intense, only because there's a smaller number of individuals that are flying and also a smaller number of individuals that are maintaining the aircraft. A typical F-18 squadron in the fleet is about 210 to 215 individuals. We only have about 120, and that's everything for our Hornets and also for our Fat Albert crew. So it tends to make us bond a lot more, and we also spend 300 days a year on the road with each other, so there's some special bonding that occurs just because you have to live with everybody all the time. So
maybe one last piece of advice for the kids out there wanting to become Blue Angels in the future. What's your advice for them?
Well, my advice for them is I never thought I'd be here, but if you have a goal and you set your mind to it, you can do it. And I think that's what everybody on the Blue Angels will tell you, that you just put your mind to whatever you'd like to do, and I'm sure you can attain it if you work hard enough at it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.